In the spring of 1852, in the Dutch Protestant cemetery at Zundert, a small white stone was set at the foot of an otherwise unmarked grave. The stone bore a biblical inscription. A woman in black stood alone beside it, and the parsonage was visible through the trees. The marker was the first of its kind in the cemetery, a stone for a stillborn child, where the town had never before recorded one. The grave itself was an adult-sized plot, but the marker was conspicuously small, set apart from the older stones, white in the cold morning light. The parsonage roof, glimpsed through the thinning trees, was the household into which another Vincent would inherit this stone, this name, and this grief. The first fact of the painter's life is grief. The living Vincent arrived on March 30, 1853, on the exact anniversary of the dead child's burial. The mother planted a symbolic garden in the parsonage, violets for courage, ivy for the promise of life to come, tree roots for life after death. The garden was a primer, each plant a small doctrine, each bed a lesson the painter would spend his life repainting in oil. The coincidence of date would later fascinate the commentators far more than the Van Goghs themselves. To the family, the new Vincent was simply the next child, and the dead child was simply the previous one. But to the world, the coincidence read as a kind of signature. The painter's answer to the stone was a discipline of looking, and the looking would not stop, and the body could not survive it. Addressed to his brother, late in 1881, the painter's first promise. This is the story of a man who could not stop seeing. A child at a creek, a stockroom boy at the art dealer's in the Hague, a preacher who gave away his clothes in a Belgian coal mining valley, a painter who broke every mentor he tried to keep except the brother, and who painted the night sky over the Rhone in a citron so bright it seemed to shed its own light. And 70 days after he left Paris for Auvers, a gunshot ended the seeing. The attention is not a metaphor. It is the work, and it is also what broke. The painter's scale and the painter's undoing are the same motion. We are going to walk through that motion slowly and let each of its seasons land before the next one arrives. Chapter 1. Zundert. Let us go back, now, to the very beginning of the living Vincent's life, to the dark parsonage at Zundert in the Dutch province of North Brabant, where he grew up among blue wallpaper bedrooms, symbolic gardens, rye stalks, and a Calvinist trinity of duty, decency, and solidity that the household breathed through every meal. The parsonage itself was modest, but its substrate was dense. A dead brother, a watching mother, a Bible read aloud nightly, a small boy already noticing more than he had words for. We are not going to rush this decade. The substrate is the painter. On the exact anniversary of the dead child's burial, on March 30, 1853, the living Vincent Van Gogh was born in the parsonage at Zundert. Anna named him after the stillborn, in a decision so quiet it is barely recorded in the family's letters. The family had already given one Vincent a small white stone. Now another Vincent would inherit the house, the symbolic garden, the Calvinist trinity of duty, decency, solidity that the household breathed at every meal, and a name that would also become a private weight. The coincidence of date would later fascinate the commentators more than the Van Goghs, who simply had a new child to raise. The candle-cold interior we are looking at now is the dimmest image of the whole film by design, the substrate the rest of the life will press against. Anna planted a symbolic garden in the parsonage, beside the kitchen door and the wood pile and the small path the children walked to school. The violets were for courage, the ivy for the promise of life to come, the tree roots for life after death. The plants were a primer. The bed was a small catechism. The painter would spend his life repainting that primer in oil. The same violet, the same ivy, the same root, translated 40 years later into brushstrokes, the color of coarse green and pale leaf. Each plant is a small doctrine the painter will return to in every era, including the last. The substrate is named once, here, and held as texture. The second-floor bedroom had blue wallpaper and 2 small beds pushed close together. Vincent shared the room with his brother Theo, 4 years younger, who slept in the other narrow bed and listened to whatever Vincent happened to be saying that night. He called Theo his angelic brother, in the way small brothers do, and the name would stick for the rest of his life. Vincent held forth nightly in the candlelight, about the Bible, about painters, about the world, about the proper way to look at a thing, and the family sat in a row below in the sitting room for the evening, reading and listened to the muffled voice through the floorboards. The brotherhood the painter would keep his whole life, the one brotherhood he would never burn, began in a small room with blue wallpaper, 2 narrow beds, and a candle that the children were not supposed to leave burning. The boy roamed. He walked the Grootbeek Creek, where his feet left imprints in the fine, wet sand, and the imprints held their shape for a moment before the water blurred them away. He watched water bugs for hours at a time, motionless at the bank until his lips were blue. He picked through rye stalks without breaking even one fine stalk, working his way down a row and back again, patient as a binder. He perched beside larks' nests for hours, watching the parent birds come and go, until Anna came to fetch him for supper. The parents periodically forbade his solo wandering. Once, when he was about 10, he walked 6 miles to Comthout on the Belgian border. Muddy clothes, late return, and Doris walked the floor in the parsonage, waiting for the boy to come home. It was the first painterly behavior in a child who did not yet know he would paint. The substrate is doing its work. Do not announce it. Anna knitted at what Vincent remembered as terrifying speed, the needles moving so fast it looked as though the wool was unrolling itself, and watched for disaster. She watched the door, the stove, the candles, the small boy's muddy boots, the girl in the next pew, the rain on the kitchen garden, the entire parsonage, all at once. He was, in the household phrase, unhurried, a strange boy, too quiet in company, too loud alone, too fond of walking off into the wet fields. The Calvinist trinity the parsonage breathed was duty, decency, solidity, de Gallicide in the Dutch, and the strange boy lived inside it without quite belonging to it, the way a single wrong-colored thread lives inside an otherwise uniform cloth. Between the stillborn Vincent and the painter's death, the parsonage filled with names. The living Vincent, the brother Theo, the brother Cor, the sister Will, the sister Lies. Each one a child whose small painted nameplate was hung on an upstairs door. Each one a figure the painter would, eventually, returned to in his work. The younger sister, Will, was born in 1862, the brother, Cor, in 1867. Lies was older than Vincent, near enough to his age to be both confidant and irritant. The parsonage was a small universe of children, each one a name on a door, each one eventually the subject of a portrait, an absence, a letter, or a hospital visit. And at the foot of the staircase, the small white stone for the brother who came first was the first name in the house. The stone and the staircase are the same staircase. The upstairs landing is the same landing we saw in the cold open. In the summer of 1868, the boy went to Watcheren with his uncle Sent, the bookkeeper uncle who would one day find him a place at the art dealer's, and for the first time saw the sea. The North Sea was not the North Sea of the painters. Not yet, not here. It was just a cold gray flatness, a moving band of slate at the edge of a wet dune. In September, his parents sent him to a school in Tilburg, a proper school this time, with a headmaster and a curriculum, and he walked out within a year. The boy who watched water bugs for hours could not sit in a classroom and not watch. He walked out and did not go back, and did not go back, and did not go back. The next year, his uncle Sent found him a place at Goupil and CA, the international art dealers in The Hague. The painter had not yet begun. The substrate was done. Chapter 2. Goupil. For the next 7 years, the seer will be trained on the line. The stockroom at Goupil, the Sunday visits to the masters, the engraver's vocabulary learned in black and white before color was allowed. He would be built on line first, and the line would carry him. The color Vincent would arrive much later, in Paris, in a different country, in a different life, but the line is the chapter's medium. Listen for the click of the engraving needle, even when the camera is not on it. On July 30, 1869, his uncle Sent registered Vincent, just turned 16, as an office clerk at Goupil and CA, the international art dealers, in a single line, in a ledger, in The Hague. He was placed in the stockroom, out of the public eye, fulfilling orders for prints from daybreak until after dark most days, including Saturday, in a tall, narrow room with a single window and shelves that went up to the ceiling. The job was to wrap the prints, label them, file them, send them to customers all over the Netherlands and Belgium and beyond. He would spend 7 years in that stockroom, learning the trade and the line. Sundays, the boy took the train. Vermeer and Rembrandt at the Maréchaussée in The Hague, where the view of Delft hung in a single room and the late self-portraits watched from the opposite wall. Frans Hals's Night Watch in Amsterdam, a single canvas larger than the boy's whole family could have slept in. Van Eyck and Memling in Brussels, the Flemish primitives with their oil paint and their patience. Rubens in Antwerp, the great colorist the boy would not yet be ready for. He drew up a list of 60 painters he loved, and wrote that he could go on like this, for he did not know how long. The painter's eye was being trained by stockroom Sundays. In August 1872, Theo came to visit. He came by train from Brussels, where he had just started work at the same firm, the same Goupil and CA, in the same kind of stockroom. They walked the towpath along the Rijswijk Canal, side by side, and bought milk from a 17th century mill, built to drain the meadows beyond the dike. A penny, a glass, drunk standing at the mill door, with the August light going gray over the meadows. Theo was 18. Vincent was 19. The boy who had held forth nightly in the candlelight told his brother about painters, about the world, about what a painting could be when it was done right. The walk became the brotherhood's founding myth, bound up in one the painter would later write, feeling, thinking, and believing the same. The walk is the only brotherhood the painter will keep. In May 1873, Goupil posted Vincent to London, to a new branch in the West End, and he took a room in Clapham, and then a better one, and then the one that mattered, 87 Hackford Road, under Ursula Lawyer and her daughter Eugenie. For a few months, he found what he called a bedroom, such as he always longed for, a small, quiet room with a proper bed and a washstand and a window onto a quiet road. He fell in love with Eugenie, who was younger than he and quiet, and did not, perhaps, understand what was happening. He proposed more than once with a candor that would embarrass him in later letters. He was refused more than once with a quietness that did not, perhaps, understand what it was refusing. Ursula Lawyer would later say of him that he had illusions about people, and that when they did not live up to his too quick judgment, they were a bouquet of withered flowers to him. The brother-burning pattern was being installed, in miniature, on a Hackford Road parlor. Paris Goupil fired him on January 4, 1875. His employer wrote to Doris that the man had made a mess of it, and that it was a scandal and a shame. In a letter that the parsonage kept, and that Vincent would, in his own later years, allude to with the rueful precision of a son who knew his father had been told. Vincent walked. He walked a great deal through the Paris winter, along the embankments of the Seine, out beyond the fortifications, into the suburbs, and back again. And he wrote a long poem, and called himself the desolate son of a beloved land. He had not yet begun to paint. He would try teaching next, and the teaching would fail, and then the Borinage would come. In London and Paris, the man who would paint had been trained on the black and white English illustrators, Hubert von Herkomer, with his social realist dock scenes, and his slow accumulation of gray, Frank Hall, with his hospital wards, and his poor, the Millet Circle, with its Sunday paintings of fallen women, and on the weekly called The Graphic, more than 500 issues in 21 volumes of it, each one a small woodcut or steel-engraved page of contemporary English life, the kind of image that could be reproduced in newspapers and pinned up in working-class parlors. The engraver's Vincent was being made, in line, before color. The figure line, Vincent. He tried teaching, briefly, in Ramsgate and Isleworth, at a boys' boarding school, where the headmaster needed an extra master, and Vincent, with his English and his reading and his willingness, was the cheapest available. He told them that feet were made to walk, in a sentence the painter would remember for the rest of his life, and walk them out into the country along the cliff paths, in long single file with Vincent at the head, talking about whatever came into his head. The boy who had watched water bugs for hours had been given an audience that did not want to be seen. The school did not renew him. He went to Dordrecht for Christmas, to the home of an uncle, and stayed. He read, he walked, he tried to draw. He could not yet draw very well, but he drew. On the last day of the year, 1876, he wrote to Theo that he was a piece of wreckage on the wide sea. The painter's discipline had collided with the heiress discipline, the stockrooms and the schools, and the family's expectation that he would settle into a trade, and the painter was down. The next stop was the Borinage, and the Borinage would be the first place the attention was given a real audience. Chapter 3. Borinage. And now the seer is given a real audience, and the audience is the miners and the dying, the saint episode, the founding of the painter, the first painted image, and the first time the attention breaks under the weight of what it sees. This is the chapter in which Vincent, aged 25, is broken open by a coal mining valley and reassembled as an artist. We are going to dwell here. The Borinage is dark, prophetic, and derelict, and the cold we are entering is not the cold of the parsonage. It is the cold of being unable to stop looking at what one is not supposed to look at. Le Pays Noir, the Black Country. Snow fell gray on the Borinage, and the soot from the pit heads mingled with the snowfall, so that the ground and the air were the same color, and the darkness, when the pits worked at night, was starless, netherworldly, the kind of dark that looks like a substance rather than an absence. The Marcasse mine went down 635 meters, more than a third of a mile, deeper than many of the English pits the painter had been studying in the graphic. The children of the mining families wept each morning as they walked to the pit head, as though they were never going to return. And the older brothers and sisters carried them part of the way, and the mothers watched from the door. The seer had been given an audience, and the audience was the coal. On April 17, 1879, an explosion tore through the Agrape pit, only 2 miles from Wasmus. 121 men died in the afterdamp and the fire damp, some of them still singing to keep themselves from falling into the gas, in the old miner's way, in a hymn whose first line is unrecorded. Vincent helped with the rescue, carried the dying out on stretchers, walked the village for 2 days distributing bread and blankets, and wrote a long letter to Theo about what he had seen. The attention that picked rice stalks without breaking one was applied in a coal mining valley to 121 men who did not survive. After a grap, the attention turned against the self. Vincent gave away his clothes, the good wool suit and the greatcoat and the underlinen. He gave away even the silver watch his father had given him on his confirmation. He stopped bathing. He slept on a wood plank in a coal shack on the edge of Wasmes, a small wooden hut with a thin chimney and a single window he kept shuttered. His bread was no butter, and a gruel of rice and sugar water. And when he was given food, he took it, but did not keep it. He gave it away. He was seen with his face blackened, barefoot, and clothed in rags, wandering the bleak landscape through snow and thunderstorms. The seer who had watched water bugs for hours had become a saint who gave away his body. Children in his catechism class called him foul, crazy, in the local French slang for the too zealous and the too quiet and the too barefoot. He answered that the Lord Jesus was also crazy, in a sentence the catechism teacher would later repeat to the committee with a kind of frightened wonder. The evangelical committee terminated him in July 1879 on the grounds that he was more of a hindrance than a help, more of a presence than a pastor. The next winter, the painter who had given away his body went through what the record calls a mental breakdown in the small coal shack in Quesmas, where he had retreated after the dismissal. He had not yet begun to paint. He was, at 26, exactly nowhere. In Wasmus, he lodged with a baker's wife, a kind and patient woman who let him sleep in a small room off the kitchen and let him draw in a red brick workshop behind her bakery in return for occasional help with the ovens. He attended a funeral service in a barn hung with lamps, the light throwing shapes on the whitewashed walls, a light not of earth, but seemed of heaven beyond, settling on their faces, in a sentence his landlady would repeat years later to a visiting cousin, with the precision of a person who had been there. It was in that barn, watching the light, that he painted his first image, a tiny gasoline-illuminated cafe called Au Charbonnage. The light from within left unshaded, a single warm lamp in a sea of black. The painter discovered he could paint by not painting the light source. In Etten, in the autumn of 1881, in the small upstairs room in the parsonage of his father's new parish, he wrote to Theo that he would take up his pencil again and that he would go on with this. The painter's first self-declaration, the founding moment, the line the cold open quoted without context. He had not yet begun to paint. Not in oil, not on canvas. He was still drawing, in pencil and charcoal, in a rented back bedroom, on cheap paper from the stationers in Etten. But the attention that had picked rice stalks without breaking one had finally been given a name, and the name was art. After Etten, he went back to the Borinage for a second penance, in Quesmas, in another coal shack, the same kind of small wooden hut on the edge of the slag heap, in a kind of dry run at the saint life he had been forced to give up. Then on to Lens, where his cousin, the mining engineer, a sensible man with a measured mustache, asked him whether he had ever thought of going back to the Borinage. The faith was gone. The drawing was what was left. The attention that had picked rye stalks without breaking one was being aimed, finally, at paper. And the paper was the place the painter would live for the rest of his life. He went to Brussels for the autumn and enrolled at the Académie Royale des Beaux-Arts in a rented studio on the Rue du Midi, in a winter of cold water studios and cheap restaurants and small charcoal sketches of working men. He bought a perspective frame, the wooden grid that holds the eye to the proportions of the scene in front of it, and threaded it with 10 or 11 strings pulled taut. He made his first 20-figure studies one after another, a working man posing for an hour at a time while Vincent drew and drew and drew. He wrote that he could not understand why they did not take more models. The painter was being made, by hand, in a rented studio, on paper, the color of dirty snow. Chapter 4. Etten, Amsterdam, The Hague. And now the seer becomes the painter, and every live mentor he tries to keep will be canonized and burned. The Etten banishment, the Amsterdam outburst, the Hague studio on the Schenkweg, the Scheveningen Marine. The painter is made in this chapter, from the line of sorrow to the oil of Scheveningen. And the medium will change, but the attention will not. We are going to meet the 5 mentors and watch them be canonized and burned in weeks. We are going to meet the Cien household and the orphan man Zuiderland. We are going to watch the conversion from line to paint happen on a beach in the North Sea. In November 1881, Vincent proposed to his widowed cousin Guy Voss in a drawing room in Leiden, in a scene he would describe to Theo in a long, embarrassed letter the next morning. She refused him, with never, no never, in a sentence so emphatic it would be quoted for a century. He pressed his hand over the gas flame in the same drawing room. The lamp broke. His father ordered him out of the parsonage that Christmas. "Get out of my house, the sooner the better, in half an hour rather than an hour," in a sentence Doris would later regret but not retract. The parsonage door locked behind him. The family breaking pattern was set. In Amsterdam, that autumn, he had an outburst in church, in the middle of a sermon by a visiting minister he had been sent to hear. There is no God. He was asked to leave by the verger, by the deacon, by the minister himself when he had finished the sermon. The faith was gone. The Calvinist trinity he had breathed as a child, the parsonage, the catechism teacher's quiet voice, all of it was gone. The drawing had replaced it, and the painter was being made. In The Hague, in late 1881 and through 1882, he took a studio on the Schenkweg, a tall back room in a working-class street near the Laan van Meerdervoort. He built a perspective frame with 10 or 11 threads, the wooden grid that anchors the eye to the scene in front of it, and hung a print of Rembrandt's Christus Consolator above his bed. He drew the lithograph that would haunt him the rest of his life. An old, sick peasant, sitting on a chair by the hearth with his head in his hands, at Eternity's gate lettered beneath. The title would return 8 years later as a Saint-Rémy canvas, the arc closing on itself in oil. He took in a woman named Sienne Hornig, pregnant and ill, with a small child, and a print of Rembrandt's Christus Consolator above the cradle. The household was a working-class matriarchy. Sienne, her mother, the small child, the unborn child, and Vincent, who paid the rent and tried to be the father. To Theo, he wrote that he was sitting down next to the woman he loved with a baby in the cradle beside them, and asked whether their father would go on being cold and finding fault beside a cradle. It was the parsonage dream attempted on a borrowed cradle in a Hague studio, in a Hague that did not yet know what to do with the painter. He canonized and burned every mentor he tried to keep. Anton Mauve, his cousin by marriage, took him on for 4 weeks over plaster casts in a studio on the Landbahn, and was gone in a row about whether a smock was a thing or a sketch. Hermanus Tersteeg, the Paris branch manager at Goupil, declared him ni fait ni affaire, neither made nor to be made, in a sentence Vincent would later copy into a letter as a kind of scar. Vincent Van Gogh, the Utrecht painter, went en froid in 1882 over a critique Vincent did not want to hear. George Hendrik Breitner, the Hague photographer-painter, lasted 2 months until Vincent decided Breitner's line was too photographic for the work. Fernand Corman, in Paris, 3, until Vincent decided Corman's atelier was a waste of his time. Every live mentor was canonized and burned in weeks. The only brother was kept. In the Hague studio, he drew the orphan man Zuiderland again and again, in different costumes, the same man recostumed as a Dutch peasant, as a Dutch digger, as a Dutch fisherman, as a Dutch washerwoman, a smock, a cap, and a peat basket transformed him into a peasant, a shovel into a digger, a sou'wester into a fisherman, a shawl into an old woman by the hearth. The studio became a working theology of the figure, in which the painter was learning that a body is a body, and a costume is a costume, and the same body can carry any costume the painter can imagine. The painter was being made, by hand, in a rented room, on paper, the color of dirty snow. By the end of the Hague years, he had counted his figure studies past 100, in a tally he kept in the back of his sketchbook, like a schoolboy marking off good days. He carried a funeral orations book in his pocket, worn soft at the spine, a small printed book of Dutch Protestant sermons on death and the life to come, which he would read on trains and in waiting rooms and at the kitchen table in the Cien household. The painter's discipline was visible in the drawings on the studio wall and in the book he carried, and the discipline is what the rest of his life will pay off. In August 1882, Theo came to The Hague on his way back from Brussels to Paris, and stayed one night in the studio on the Shankwag. He refused to bless the Cien marriage, and a long, quiet conversation by the window. He agreed to support Vincent financially for a year, a sum the painter would treat as a lifeline. And on the way out, at the studio door, he told him he must turn away from black and white figure, drawing toward landscape and color. Vincent would have to erase Cien not just from his public life, but from his art as well. The pattern repeated. The brotherhood was kept. The woman was not. The pattern will repeat again at Arles, and the brotherhood will keep. He went to Scheveningen in August 1882, within weeks of leaving the Hague hospital, in a small convalescent pension on the boulevard, looking out at the North Sea. He took a paint box, a new acquisition, a wooden box of tubes and brushes, and a small palette, and plunged headlong into oil, in a fortnight, on the dunes and the beach, painting the sea and the sand, and the fishing smacks at sea. He wrote to Theo that he was sure no one could tell that they were his first painted studies. To tell the truth, it surprised him a little. In a sentence that is the painter's first report from the new medium, the conversion from line to paint happened in a fortnight on the North Sea coast. Within weeks of the Scheveningen studies, he wrote to Theo that painting was in the very marrow of his bones, in a sentence that closes the chapter's arc and announces the painter. The painter was made in this chapter, from the line of sorrow to the oil of Scheveningen, from the engraver's vocabulary learned in black and white to the small paint box on the folding stool on the dunes. The attention was the same attention, only the medium had changed. And the medium will change again, in Paris, in color. But the attention is the substrate we have been following since the Groot Beek Creek, and it will not change. In March 1883, Cien delivered a son in the Hôpital de Saint-Paul, a small boy who would be named Willem. Theo wrote that the household could not continue, that the painter's money was almost gone, that something would have to give. Vincent left The Hague in late September 1883, with Cien and the children, for Drenthe, in the wet peat bog country of the northeast Netherlands, in a small caravan and on foot. The brother-bound man began wandering in the way that wandering painters wander, away from the city and toward the horizon. The painter had been made. Chapter 5. Drenthe Nuenen, Antwerp. And now the northern palette, the weavers section, the potato eaters, and the father's death. The painter makes the substrate before Paris converts him, in the cold Brabant light, in the dark weavers' interiors, in the smoky kitchens of Nuenen. We are going to meet a peat digger, a parsonage rear goblin place, a weaving family with pale, unhealthy faces, the 5 peasants of the potato eaters, the dying father, and the brief, dismissive academy interlude in Antwerp. The brown and gray palette of Brabant will carry us through. In Drenthe, in the autumn of 1883, he walked the peat bogs, the wide, flat, wet country of the northeast Netherlands, in cold, clear weather that let him see for miles. He lodged with an innkeeper and a peat digger in a small inn at the edge of a village called Vinhuisen, in a room that smelled of peat smoke and damp wool. He wrote to Theo that he was a man who had a fire in his belly, in a sentence that is the painter's first announcement of his own energy, his own refusal to be extinguished. He made his first sustained landscape drawings of the ground, of the orphan men cutting peat, of the flat, wet horizon, in the brown and gray palette of Brabant, in its most northern form. The painter was learning to paint the ground. In December 1883, Vincent went to Nuenen, to the parsonage of his father's new parish, in the small North Brabant village where Doris had been appointed to a livings he would keep for the rest of his life. He lodged at the rear of the parsonage, in a studio behind the kitchen garden, a goblin-like place in wild grass, a few trees bent to one side and furiously whipped by the wind, and a sense of his own spirit of unrest and driven haste forcing itself upon one, the Brabant painter's first home. In Nuenen, he drew the weaver's section, the pale, unhealthy faces, white, nervous fingers at the loom, the dark interiors, the smoke, the smell of damp wool and human sweat and slow vegetable dye. He mixed bluing into his coffee grounds to stretch the palette, a thrifty trick the landlady had taught him, and the resulting blue-black wash became a Nuenen signature. He met his brother Cor one afternoon in a forest fire among smoldering pines, the 2 brothers walking through the smoke with wet cloths over their mouths, in a scene the family would remember. He kept a bird nest glass ball in the corner of the studio, a small clear sphere with a dried wren's nest inside it, a tiny private altar. The painter was being made in the Brabant dark. In April and May of 1885, in the dark Nuenen studio behind the kitchen garden, he painted the potato eaters, 5 peasants at a table under a single oil lamp, eating potatoes they had dug themselves that autumn, the earth still on their hands. The faces are coarse and brown and patient. The lamp throws a small, warm pool of light on the center of the table and leaves the rest of the canvas in shadow. It was the last Brabant canvas, the hearth-fire palette before Antwerp and Paris, and color, the substrate the painter would carry with him to Paris and refuse, for years, to give up. The painter had made his substrate. On May 26, 1885, his father died of heart disease in the front bedroom of the Nuenen parsonage, with Anna at his side and the small household quiet in the house. Vincent walked the floor for hours from sleeplessness in the studio at the back of the parsonage, unable to sit, unable to draw, unable to read. At the deathbed, he said that it was easier for him to die than to live. that dying was hard, but living still harder. The painter's first grief, and the first time the painter saw grief from the outside, the way he would see other people's grief for the rest of his life. In November 1885, he enrolled at the Royal Academy in Antwerp with a small scholarship from Theo and the plan of staying for a year. He copied a Rubens in the museum, The Elevation of the Cross, on a sheet of brown paper with charcoal and white chalk, in a copy that is still admired in the Academy for its boldness. The professor told him he was a mere illustrator and to stop seeing. In a sentence the painter would later quote as the Academy's epitaph. He refused. He left the Academy within 3 months and went to Theo in Paris. In January 1886, on his way to Paris, he stopped at Zundert, a fishing village on the North Sea coast, a few hours west of Amsterdam, and made a small sketch of a fisherman at sea. The sketch was done in oils, on a small piece of prepared board, with a brighter palette than the Brabant dark, a palette that leaned toward the color sense he had not yet acquired. It was the first Dutch painter as Impressionist claim, the brown and gray palette ceding to a brighter light. The conversion was coming. In February 1886, Theo met him at the Gare du Nord in the cold Paris rain, on a platform heaving with third-class passengers from Brussels and Antwerp. The painter arrived in color, with a brown and gray palette, in a small portmanteau and a paint box, and a winter coat that was already too thin for Paris. The chromatic conversion was about to begin, and the brothers would be under the same roof again, for the first time in years, in a small apartment on the Rue Lepic at the foot of the Butte Montmartre. Chapter 6. Paris. And now, the chromatic conversion. The Cormon Atelier, the Chevreul lacquered box of color wheels, the Japanese outbreak of over 1,000 Japanese woodblock prints on credit, the Signac conversion at Asnières on the Seine. The line and the color are reconciled at last, not as opposites, but as two ways of getting inside the same haystack, two ways of looking at the same world. The Paris years are the painter's shortest chapter, and also the most crowded. 100 canvases in 18 months, and a brotherhood that frays as the work accelerates. In Paris, he enrolled at the Cormon Atelier, a large studio in the Rue de Constantinople, where 100 students painted from the model in the morning and from casts in the afternoon. He wrote that color drove him mad, in a sentence that is the chromatic conversion's first report. He bought a Chevreul lacquered box of color wheels, the small wooden box of painted discs the old chemist, Michel Eugene Chevreul, had designed to demonstrate complementary contrast. He courted the Italian Agostina Segatori at the Café du Tambourine, the Italian model who ran a small cafe on the Boulevard de Clichy, and got into a beer glass fight with her in a scene that ended with the police. He haunted Peritengai's paint shop. He moved with Theo into 54 Rue Lepic. In the first month in Paris, the painter was converted to color. He admitted in the first year in Paris that in Antwerp he had not even known what the Impressionists were, in a sentence that is the painter's first self-criticism as a Brabant-trained eye. The painter had arrived ignorant and was taught by Theo, by Signac, by the painters in Tangai's shop, by the Salon des Independents where the late Monet and the late Pissarro were hanging, by the La Butte and the Sacré-Cœur rising over the gardens. The line and the color were reconciled at Peritengai's and at the Salon des Independents, and on the La Butte, in the painter's discovery that a brushstroke of pure color is also a brushstroke of pure line. He hung a show at the Restaurant du Chalet on the boulevard, and no public came, in a sentence that is the painter's first commercial humiliation in Paris. He bought over 1,000 Japanese woodblock prints on credit from Siegfried Bing's shop on the Rue de Provence and pinned them to the walls of the Rue Lepic apartment, edge to edge, until there was barely any wall left. He read the Goncourts, Zola, Maupassant, Pierre Loti, the late 19th century French novelists whose flat prose was the French equivalent of the Japonese flat tone. He coined cloisonnism for the flat tone that was becoming his own shorthand. In the spring of 1887, Paul Signac, a young painter 5 years Vincent's junior, took him to Asnières, on the Seine west of Paris, to paint the river in the new pointillist technique, in small separated touches of pure color. He wrote that summer that he had only to open his eyes and paint what was right in front of him, in the painter's first sentence of the new chromatic obedience. On March 10, 1888, he wrote the Cooperative Plan Manifesto. If Degas, Claude Monet, Renoir, Sisley, and C. Pissarro would take the initiative, in a letter to Theo that is also a letter to the Impressionist old guard. The painter had been taught. Now he wanted to teach. In the spring of 1888, he wrote that one cannot be at the pole and at the equator at once, that one must choose one's way, and that his way would be the road to color, in a sentence that is the painter's manifesto, addressed to himself as much as to Theo. The pole is the Dutch palette, the engraver's line, the Brabant dark. The equator is the Impressionist color, the Japanese flat tone, the pointillist touch. The painter cannot hold both. He chooses the equator. He goes south, to Arles, to the Midi, to the road to color. The Tambourine auction, in February 1888, was a success de rire, a success at making people laugh. In the local press, in a sentence the painter would repeat as a kind of scar, he sketched the brothel district at Asnières in a series of small oils that are among the most direct of his career, and went through an endless Signac clone phase in a sequence of pointillist landscapes that are also the painter's farewell to Paris. The chromatic conversion was settling in. On the La Butte Montmartre, in the 18 months after Antwerp, he painted 100 canvases, thousands of unique marks on the windmill of the Moulin de la Galette, on the gardens and the chestnut trees, on the Sacré-Cœur rising against the sky Vincent blue, in the Café Bright Paris palette at its fullest. The painter was at full pitch, and the line and the color had been reconciled in the painter's most productive period of his life. The brotherhood strained. Theo wrote in his diary, in the winter of 1888, that there had been a time when he had loved Vincent, and Vincent had been his best friend. But that was now in the past, and that he wished Vincent would go and live by himself. The brotherhood was the only brotherhood the painter had, the only brotherhood he had ever kept, and it was fraying under the strain of the painter's intensity, the painter's brother-bound need, the painter's inability to leave the Rue Lepic apartment without Theo feeling that he was being abandoned. On February 19, 1888, Vincent left Paris for good on the night express from the Gare de Lyon with a small portmanteau and a paint box, and a winter coat that was still too thin for the long journey south. He told Theo that he could not stay in Paris, for he and Theo would have become too close. The brotherhood, he saw clearly, would either fuse or break, and he chose to break it gently by going south. The chromatic conversion was complete. The brotherhood was too close. The painter went south, to Arles, to the Midi, to the road to color he had been promising himself for a year. Chapter 7. Arles. And now, the brief and the disaster. The yellow house, the sunflowers, the bedroom, the night sky, and the brotherhood that breaks. The first 6 months in Arles are the most productive of his life. The next 6 are the breakdown. Both are the same attention, the same painter, looking at the same world, with the same refusal to stop. We are going to meet the Langlois Bridge and the Zouave and the Roulin family, the all-yellow canvas and the Gauguin chairs and the chalk on the wall, and the night of December 23, 1888. None of it is melodrama. It is the painter's work and the painter's breaking. He arrived in Arles on February 19, 1888, on the night train from Paris, in snow deep enough to cover his shoes, in a scene that is the painter's first contradiction of the Midi he had been promised. The Midi in winter was cold and white, and the snow on the Roman arena and the Provençal cobbles was a strange and silent thing, and he was alone. He wrote Theo that often whole days passed without his speaking to anyone, except to ask for dinner or coffee. The painter was alone, in a foreign town, in a foreign cold, with a paint box he did not yet know how to use in this light. He painted the orchards in their spring blossom, pink against a pale Provençal sky. He painted the Langlois Bridge, a Dutch-built bascule bridge with women washing at the bank, the kind of scene Rembrandt might have painted in a flat panel. And in September, the yellow house at 2 Place, Lamartine, yellow color of fresh butter on the outside, with glaringly green shutters, 4 rooms, no heat, no gas, no bathroom, the trains passing less than 100 feet from the door, in a small house he would share, he hoped, with the painter Paul Gauguin, the parsonage of the Midi. Everything had to be bought in twos, he wrote to Theo. 2 beds, 2 wardrobes, 2 easels, 2 sets of cutlery, 2 of everything, because the yellow house was being built for 2 painters. The second bedroom was for Gauguin. The painter planned the Brotherhood, the first great collective studio of its kind since the medieval guilds. In a sentence the painter will later repeat, with the rueful precision of a man who knows the Brotherhood is going to fail. He painted sunflowers as stained glass windows in a Gothic church. He painted the Roulin family at supper time. He painted an all-yellow canvas for Gauguin's welcome. The Brotherhood was being planned, and the painting was at full pitch. He painted the Zouave with a bull neck and eyes like a tiger, a soldier from the Algerian regiments stationed at Arles. He painted La Mausme, half Japanese print and half Arlesian. He painted the Sower, a Millet translation into the Midi sun. He painted the sunflowers in 3 yellow pictures that are among the most expensive paintings in the world today. He painted the bedroom, of which he wrote that a look at the picture ought to rest the mind, ought to rest the brain, ought to rest the imagination. And he painted the starry night over the Rhone, in which each star was a citron aura, like the nimbus that encircled the head of Delacroix's Christ, in a sentence that is the painter's own gloss on his own canvas. The yellow house was at full pitch. He wrote at the height of the apotheosis in the autumn of 1888 that he used color to express himself forcibly, in a sentence that is the painter's first defense of the new chromatic obedience. And he wrote in the same season that the painter of the future would be a colorist, the like of which had never yet been seen, in a sentence that is the painter's first claim on the future, addressed to himself as much as to Theo. The painter's manifesto, written at the height of the yellow house, in a high-ceilinged studio with 2 easels and an all-yellow canvas drying against a wall. Gauguin arrived on October 23, shortly after 5 in the morning. He wrote, "Too early to intrude on a man he barely knew," in a sentence the painter would later quote with the rueful precision of a man who knows he had hoped for too much. They painted the same subject, Vincent's chair yellow and red, Gauguin's chair red and green. The 2 paintings, now in the same museum in Amsterdam, hung side by side, the brotherhood's 2 halves, visible at a glance. They discoursed at Montmajour, the ruined abbey on the hill above Arles, on Delacroix's Bruyas portrait in the Montpellier Museum. The brotherhood was being tested, and the test was failing. Then, in late November, the brotherhood began to break. He wrote on the studio wall in yellow chalk, "Echez Saint-Esprit, I am the Holy Spirit," in a sentence that is either the painter's last claim on the brotherhood or his first claim on a larger brotherhood the brotherhood cannot give him, depending on which biographer you read. The brotherhood was being tested past what it could hold, and the studio wall was the surface on which the test was being recorded. On December 23, 1888, Gauguin announced he was leaving, in a scene the 2 men would disagree about for the rest of their lives. Vincent went into the public garden, the small park near the arena, and handed Gauguin a newspaper clipping. "Le meurtrier a pris la fuite," the murderer has fled, in a phrase that may have been a joke and may have been a warning, depending on which biographer you read. That night, alone in the yellow house, he took the straight razor from the washstand and slashed the lower lobe of his left ear. He wrapped a piece like a cut of meat and carried it to Rachel, called Gabby, at the brothel on the Rue du Bois d'Arles. "Remember me." Then he went home and lay down. The episode is told as it was. The script does not adjudicate. The ambiguity is the point. He was found unconscious in his bedroom the next morning by the police, who had been called by the neighbors who had heard the sound of a body falling. The police took him to the Hôtel Dieu, the small city hospital, and then to the isolation cell. The neighbors signed a petition. The Dutch subject, named Wood, no longer knows either what he does or what he says, in a sentence whose spelling alone tells you how little the Arles neighbors understood their painter. He was in the hospital for 4 days, then in the isolation cell for a month. Signac, who had come down to Arles on hearing the news, broke down the door to the yellow house to see what had happened. The painter was broken. The brotherhood was over. He was released in early January, and readmitted for a second 26-day stay in February, in a sequence of hospitalizations that the painter would later call the body's refusal to be supervised. He wrote to Bernard that the painter must not couple, that he was living as if one were already in the throes of a disease of the brain or the spine. In a sentence, that is the painter's first formal recognition that the will cannot do alone what the regimen must do. The body was being supervised by the willpower, and the willpower was failing. On May 8, 1889, he left Arles for the asylum at Saint-Paul-de-Monceau in Saint-Rémy, in a small Provençal road climbing toward the Alpilles. Chapter 8: Saint-Rémy and Auvers. And now the seer is interned, and the seeing becomes the only release. The barred window, the irises, the cypresses, the starry night, the Sunday afternoon in June, the Daubigny's garden in July, and the burial chapel with yellow flowers on the threshold. We are going to hold this chapter longer than any chapter since Zundert. The asylum and the garden are the painter's last 2 years, and they are the years in which the work becomes the rule, and the rule becomes the work. On May 8, 1889, Vincent entered the asylum of Saint-Paul-de-Monceau in Saint-Rémy de Provence, a former monastery in the foothills of the Alpes, in a small back room on the upper floor with a barred window and a sea-green curtain. From his room's barred window, he could see an enclosed square of wheat, a prospect like a Van Goghian, above which, in the morning, he watched the sun rise in all its glory. The curtains were sea-green, with a design of very pale roses. The painter had been interned, and the seeing became the only release. In the asylum, Vincent assembled an imaginary brotherhood of painters who had suffered not failure, but only a malady of the times. Constant Troyon, the painter of the French countryside; Antoine Marchal, the engraver of Paris; Charles Merrill, the etcher of Paris, who ended his days in Charenton; Auguste Junt, the Alsatian painter of small-town interiors; Matthias Maris, the Dutch painter of contemplative cats in quiet kitchens; Monticelli, the Provençal painter of thick, encrusted color who died in the asylum at Lyon. He wrote to Theo that there was much true friendship here, meaning in the asylum, in a sentence the painter would repeat in the next letter, and the next, as a kind of incantation. When the brotherhood could not be lived, it could be imagined. At St. Paul, in 12 months, he painted almost 150 works at the rate of almost a painting every other day, in a sequence that is among the most productive of any painter who has ever lived. The irises, in May 1889, against a single iris bed in the asylum garden, in a violet and ochre palette that the painter had not yet named. The cypresses, with their beautiful lines against the blue, in a sequence of small canvases that the painter would later describe as among the best things he had done. The starry night, painted from memory and the imagination, in the only starry night the painter ever painted. The Reaper, the Millet translations, the olive groves, in a steady output of small and large canvases that the asylum's routine did not interrupt. The self-portrait with rayon noir, with the painter's pipe at his mouth and the dark bandaged ear, which he could never share with Theo. In a sentence the painter would later repeat, with the rueful precision of a man who knows the painting is too honest for the brother. The asylum was both convalescence and cage. The body broke 4 times. In July 1889, for more than a month, he suffered hallucinations, faintness, vertigo, unconsciousness. In a sequence of symptoms, the asylum's doctors would record in the clinical file. In late December 1889, a second attack. In January 1890, he was found wandering the streets of Arles, dazed, unable to remember who he was. In a scene the painter would later describe to Theo with the same careful attention he gave to a cypress. In February 1890, after the painting of the struck pine at St. Paul, a fourth, the body was being supervised by the regimen, the twice-weekly 2-hour baths, the bread and cheese and pipe of tobacco that the doctors called the Dickens cure. The attacks were named in order. The work went on between them. In January 1890, Albert Aurier, a young French art critic, published an article in the Mercure de France that put the name Vincent on every lip, in a sentence that is the painter's first sustained public recognition. At the Salon des Indépendants opening in March, in a gallery on the Rue Le Pelletier, Monet pronounced his pictures the best of all in the exhibition, and Gauguin, who had arrived from Pont-Aven, said he was the only exhibitor who thinks. In February, Anna Boch, a Belgian painter and collector, bought the Red Vineyard in Brussels for 400 francs, the only painting he sold in his life. The painter was alive, at full pitch, and famous for the first time. In the same month, in early 1890, the painter wrote 2 letters within weeks of each other. The first, that the painter of the future would be a colorist, the like of which had never yet been seen in the prophet's voice. The second, that as a painter he should never amount to anything important, and that he was absolutely sure of it in the self-doubter's voice. The prophet and the self-doubter, in the same month, in the same handwriting, in the same small St. Paul writing desk, the painter's voice engine, named in a sequence the painter would repeat for the rest of his letters, and that the letter density itself only makes visible. The Arles yellow inverted. The Saint-Rémy palette was violet and ochre, he wrote to Theo, the complementary of the yellow that had so dominated his sunburnt days in Arles. The cypresses and olive groves and wheat fields became Van Goghian sepias, the Dutch palette with its gray tones, in a sentence the painter would later repeat with the rueful precision of a man who knows he has come home. The Arles yellow was returning home. On January 31, 1890, Jo Bonger, Theo's Dutch wife from Amsterdam, gave birth to a son in a small apartment on the Rue Lepic that had been empty of the painter for a year. The baby was named Vincent, after the painter, in a decision Theo and Jo made together in the late winter of the painter's asylum year. It was a new sun rising inside him, Vincent wrote to his mother, in a sentence the painter would repeat to Will in the next letter, and to Theo in the next. The brotherhood was about to be real. In May 1890, the painter decided to leave St. Paul. He wrote to Theo that he categorically rejected what Theo said, that he must be accompanied the whole way, and that once on the train, he would be quite safe, in the painter's last sentence to his brother from the asylum. On May 20, he took the train to Auvers-sur-Oise, in the Oise Valley northwest of Paris, to be under the care of Dr. Gachet, a homeopathic doctor and amateur engraver whom Theo described in a letter that has survived as a brother and a friend. In June 1890, Theo, Joe, and the baby Vincent came to Auvers for a Sunday afternoon. In a small family visit, the brothers had been promising themselves for months. The painter imitated a crowing cock for the baby, Cocorico, in a great spreading of arms and a red-faced shout, and the baby screamed louder. The painter laughed and crowed again, and the baby screamed louder still, in a scene the family would remember for the rest of their lives, and that Joe would later describe to her son as the painter's last happy afternoon. The brotherhood was real for one Sunday afternoon. This was the climax of the painter's life, not the death. The next day, the painter went back to work. In the last 70 days at Auvers, he painted almost a painting every other day, in a sequence that is the painter's last full pitch. The Gachet portrait, with its melancholy expression, which might well seem like a grimace to those who see it, in a sentence the painter used as a kind of insurance against disappointment. The church at Auvers, whose 12th century walls and buttresses spring from the wildflower-strewn grass in bright shades of violet and ochre, against the simple, deep, pure cobalt sky. In a sentence the painter wrote to Theo, and that closes the painter's career. The D'Albini garden, the Revue Inn, the tree roots, where one seems to enter a distant, deeper world, abstract and absorbing. In a sentence, the painter used for the painting he had just finished. The last wheat fields under troubled skies, where his life is threatened at the very root, and his steps are wavering. In a sentence, the painter wrote to Will, and that closes the painter's letters. On July 24, 2 days before the end, he sketched D'Aubigny's garden in a letter to Theo and Joe, in a small pen and ink drawing in the body of the letter. In the painter's last documented image, foreground of green and pink grass, a black figure with a yellow hat, sky pale green. In a sentence, the painter used as the closing of the closing. The garden the brother was supposed to plant, the painter hoped. The painter's last documented image, the closing image of the film. On July 27, 1890, in the early evening, the painter walked out from the Revue Inn to paint, as he had walked out every evening for weeks, and returned without his easel. A bullet was in his stomach. He said, "Do not accuse anyone. It is I who wanted to kill myself," in a sentence that has been disputed by every biographer who has touched the death. The doctor was summoned from Paris. The wound did not heal. On July 29, in the early hours, Theo, at his side, the painter died. At the burial chapel in Auvers, yellow flowers were laid, in a detail the curate would later remember. At the graveside model, Dr. Gachet muttered that the painter was an honest man and a great artist, for a man he barely knew. Theo sobbed on the heath. On August 5, Theo wrote to his mother that he would not be remembered in the obscurity to which he was now consigned, and that he would not be forgotten, in a sentence that closes the Brotherhood's letters. The death question is held open. The suicide reading, the Secretangian boy's reconstruction, the missing gun and kit, the missing autopsy, the missing coroner's inquest. The chapter holds all three. The chapter does not adjudicate.